Hey everyone, it's Raj, aka 3CB Performance. Welcome to my first video collabing with Laker Film Room. Today's topic is piggybacking off LFR's recent breakdown of DeAndre Hunter. Scope that video immediately if you haven't yet, and how his flat-footedness may help explain some of his key weaknesses. Specifically, I'll be explaining why being quote-unquote flat-footed puts a player at a disadvantage biomechanically and how that manifests on the court. What I immediately noticed was that on Hunter's stationary jumper, he typically catches with both feet flat on the ground and then goes into his dip. That's important to note for Hunter because a key critique of his jumper, as Coach Pete explicitly mentioned, is how long his catch and release takes. Case in point was this much publicized play where Duke's Zion Williamson was able to recover from the paint and block his shot. The problem with shooting flat-footed is that it doesn't take advantage of a key biomechanical principle known as the stretch and shorten cycle, or SSC for short. When a muscle or ligament is stretched, it stores passive energy, and then when it contracts and shortens, that energy is released. It's akin to a spring that you're pulling apart and then releasing. That principle of SSC is especially important at your Achilles tendon, which is that cord-like structure on the back of your heel. It's the strongest tendon in the body because it takes on so much force during movement. Accordingly, it can store that force and then release it to create quick twitch movements. On a jumper, the stretch-shorten cycle applies all throughout the lower body. What you tend to see from quick-release players is that they'll quote-unquote preload their lower body by going up onto the ball of their foot, aka the forefoot. This position puts the ankle into dorsiflexion, the knees into increased flexion or bending, and the trunk into flexion. These positions place tension, stretch, on a key jumping anatomy, specifically the Achilles tendon, quads, and glutes. One of the best examples of this is Steph Curry. He immediately positions his body onto his forefoot with his heels off the floor. In this position, his Achilles, quads, and glutes are quickly stretched and full of that elastic energy. His dip is so quick because he's placing himself into an optimal biomechanical position. Once he goes into his jump, that passive energy is immediately transferred into active energy. It's a beautiful thing. Compare that shooting process to Hunter's, who goes into his dip with feet flat and thus has to bend his knees and hip considerably more to create that tension in his lower body. It's a significantly longer process. For other examples of flat-footed shooters, I reached out to Mike Garcia, aka @CanyonDriver, who writes for B-Ball Index, SB Lakers, and is generally a Rolodex of player information. He brought my attention to Kelly Oubre Jr. Oubre came into the league as a flat-footed shooter, with this footage coming from his first summer league. However, a key tweak that he's worked on is getting at least 1 foot into that loaded 4-foot position we talked about. Here he is working with his trainer Drew Hanlon over the summer, and you can see the difference with his front foot. Further, there were 2 additional weaknesses that Coach Pete pointed out which caught my attention. Hunter has difficulty staying in front of multiple linked moves. He'd be toast if facing Van Damme in Bloodsport. In conjunction with Hunter's habit of being flat-footed during his stationary shot, I thought that same movement pattern may help explain this weakness. Watch Hunter's feet when he's forced to change direction defensively, completely flat to the ground, and you can see he has trouble getting back into the play. There's no spring because he's at a biomechanical disadvantage, and playing defense is a game of angles and margins. If the body has to do more, even if it takes a split second, there's a butterfly effect. For a counterexample, watch Lonzo Ball play defense. On this closeout and change of direction, he's constantly on the ball of his foot, and it's even hyper-exaggerated in this example. If you've ever heard the defensive advice of play on your toes, or as an attacker, get your defender on the heels, this is partly why. Playing more on the forefoot enables the stretch-shorten cycle, which unlocks that spring and quick change of direction. Coach Pete pointed out that Hunter has a slow first step on his drive. Driving flat-footed can limit that initial burst because the stretch-shorten cycle is critical for twitch acceleration. Hunter has minimal heel rise when he tries to burst past defenders. He's starting his drive flat-footed, and that limits his first step quickness. NBA parallel of that is D'Angelo Russell. However, D'Lo has been able to work around it because he's very crafty on the ball and with his body, especially off the pick and roll and putting players into jail. And the threat of his off-dribble jumper keeps defenders off balance as well. However, that's not a level of craft or zeal that Hunter has shown any penchant for. A counterexample of a vicious first step is Kobe Bean Bryant. He would load his back leg by going onto the ball of his foot and then stretch, shorten, spring forward. Nasty. All in all, basketball is a game of margins, which get even thinner on the NBA level and razor thin once you head into the playoffs. And playing flat-footed without taking advantage of the stretch-shorten cycle creates biomechanical inefficiency that decreases those margins for success. It can be the difference between getting a shot off, getting into the lane, or being able to cut off a lane versus a secondary move. The question for Hunter becomes, can he change that flat-footedness and possibly mitigate some of these weaknesses? There's no way for me to answer that for sure, but what I can say is that it's really difficult to change any pattern of movement that's been ingrained for 21 years, especially when the player has had relative success with that movement, which reinforces it even more. You think about how difficult it is to change a jump shot and how topsy-turvy that journey can be, and yet that's an explicit, concrete movement. In this case, we're talking about a much more nuanced movement that is done in the heat of the moment. Extremely difficult to alter. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for watching. You can always find me on IG and Twitter at 3CB Performance, and on my own YouTube channel where I deep dive into player injuries. Make sure to sub to this channel and follow LFR on all social media as well. 3CB out.